Hey there, and welcome back to my channel where legal concepts are explained simply. In this video, we will look at a famous case in tort law called Smith v. Leech Brain and Company. Published in 1962, this case illustrates the Eggshell Skull rule. Let's get into the facts of this case. In 1962, Mr. Smith worked at Leech Brain and Company. They were a metal company who specialized in grinding metal. His job required him to work near machines that contained molten metal at very high temperatures. On one occasion, a piece of molten metal splashed out of the machine and struck Mr. Smith on the lip. Now, this was a particularly nasty workplace injury. The metal had been superheated and it left a burn on his lip. However, it did not seem to be a serious burn, and he did not seek any medical treatment immediately after the incident. 3 years later, Mr. Smith died of cancer. It turned out that the burn on his lip had triggered the cancer and it spread aggressively throughout his body. So tragically, he died. Mr. Smith's widow then sued his employer, Leech Brain and Company, for negligence. She argued that the company should be liable for the full extent of the harm, even though the death was a result of a pre-existing condition. Let's see how this case was decided. In court, the judge considered the following. First, what was the duty of care owed by the employer to the employee? Was the employer in breach of that duty? Did the breach cause the death? And was the death too remote a consequence to be recoverable? The first two questions were not in dispute. Mr. Smith's employer had a duty to take reasonable steps to ensure the safety of their employees. And it was not seriously argued that they had done everything reasonable to protect their workers. However, the third question was in dispute. Was it too remote for the employer to be liable for the death? To answer this, we must consider the Eggshell Skull rule. The Eggshell Skull rule is a principle in tort law that was established in a previous case called Scott v. Shepard in 1798. This principle provides that you take your victim as you find them. What does that mean? In simple terms, it means that if a defendant in a tort case negligently injures someone, they are fully liable for all of the resulting harm. That is true even if the injured person has a hidden vulnerability or a pre-existing condition that makes the harm worse than it would otherwise be. So applying this rule to our case, we must ask, was the death a foreseeable consequence of the injury? If the answer is yes, then the employer is liable for the death. But if the death was too remote a consequence of the employer's negligence, then they would only be liable for the injury up until the point of the negligence. The employer argued that it was not foreseeable that Mr. Smith would develop cancer and die. Therefore, they should not be liable for the full extent of the harm. They argued that the burn on his lip was so small that it could not have caused him to die 3 years later. However, the court rejected this argument. Once it was established that some personal injury was foreseeable, then the employer was responsible for all other consequences flowing from that injury. It did not matter that the specific way in which the harm developed was not expected. Therefore, the court found that the defendant employer was liable for the full extent of the harm, including the death. Now let's look at the decision the court reached. The court ruled in favor of Mr. Smith's widow. The defendant employer, Leech Brain and Company, was held liable for negligence, and the damages awarded included the death. Why? Because the thin skull principle meant that they had to take Mr. Smith as they found him, literally. They had to accept his vulnerability and be liable for all consequences flowing from their negligent act. Even though the burn was not serious when it happened, it was the trigger that caused the cancer to develop and ultimately led to his death. Therefore, the employer was liable for the death. This case is more than just a story about a workplace injury. It is a reminder that in tort law, justice protects even the most vulnerable. A small negligent act can have life-changing or even life-ending consequences, and the law demands full accountability. Thank you for watching this video. If you found it helpful, please hit the like button below. Subscribe to my channel and share it with your classmates. I hope you learned something, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thank you.